In this exercise, we'll go through various accounts and talk about which bucket they fall into and the effect of a debit or credit. So let's start with inventory. So what type of an account is inventory? Hopefully you know inventory is an asset, and as an asset, inventory would increase with the debit. And we know that inventory as an asset is on the left-hand side of the balance sheet. Assets increase on the left-hand side, and so therefore debit would increase. Salaries. When we see salaries, you should think about salaries expense. So salaries is an expense. As you may recall, expenses work like assets in that they increase with the debit. PP&E is also an asset, and it works the same way as cash. It would increase with the debit. So remember, on our balance sheet we have assets on the left and liabilities and equity on the right. On the left hand side are our assets, and in the T account the left hand side is the debit. So left and left increases with assets. Notes payable. Notes payable, anytime you see a payable, would be a liability. And so liabilities are on the right hand side and therefore increase on the right hand side, and so increase with a credit. Cash we should all be familiar with. Cash is an asset and it increases with the debit. Insurance health. So health insurance is an expense of an entity. So we would click off expense, and we know that expenses increase with the debit. They reduce equity. Remember we talked about that, where expenses reduce equity, revenues increase equity. Equity is on the right hand side, and so increases on the right hand side. So equity would decrease on the left hand side. So expenses decrease equity, and so you debit them. G&A, this is referred to as G&A, general and administrative, is an expense, right? You see here expense, so whenever you see expense in the title, you can rest assured it's probably an expense. So retained earnings is one of the two equity accounts that we have, right? Retained earnings. The other one you may see is additional paid-in capital or paid-in capital. So equity is on the right hand side, so it increases with a credit. So when I put effect here, you would put increase or decrease. So the ones with the X are increase. If it's blank, it would mean it would decrease. Dues and membership would be an expense. And again, an expense would increase with a debit. Patient revenue. So when you see revenue, rest assured it's probably a revenue account. So revenue would increase with a credit, right? Revenue increases our equity. Our equity is on the right hand side, and so it increases with a credit. Now, we haven't talked much about accumulated depreciation, and actually we're going to skip over that for right now. Net assets is similar to equity section, but that's for a non-profit entity. So this is our equity section of a non-profit entity. We'll talk about more of that in a few weeks. And the effect of a debit would reduce net assets. The effect of a credit would increase it. Prepaid insurance. Anytime we have a prepaid, that means we paid for something in advance. So insurance, we do that a lot in healthcare with malpractice insurance, workers' comp insurance, and so forth. And so that would be an asset, and the effect of that would be an increase with a debit. Accounts receivable, as we know, is when we have performed services but we don't get paid for them at that time. We're going to bill and get paid later, so we are going to receive money later. So that is an asset, and that increases with a debit. Answering services, another way could be answering services expense, and so that is an expense, and it increases with the debit. Notes receivable is when we've loaned money or provided resources or money in advance, and so we are going to receive payment, so that is an asset as well, and the effect of that would increase with a debit. Accrued payroll, that's like accrued salaries. That's when we have incurred the expense of payroll, but we haven't paid it yet. So we're going to pay it at a later date. So we owe that money to our employees, so that would be a liability. And as such, liabilities are on the right-hand side. They increase on the right-hand side, so it would increase with a credit. If you have questions about any of these, please either send me an email or post to the forum.